Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And today we have a first timer making their official debut here on the channel. And I'm going to say this right now, viewers and listeners. This guest has probably the most amazing bio that I have ever gotten from a guest now going on 3 years. Let me tell you what I mean. My guest is a graduate of Kent and London universities. He gained his PhD from Royal Holloway, University of London in 2013, where he won a Reid Research Scholarship and was elected Fellow of the Royal Historical Society in 2017 and Fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society in 2021, and holds an honorary research fellowships at Royal Holloway, the University of Kent, and Oxford Brookes University. A former lecturer in medieval history at Trinity College, Dublin, he's one of the most prolific historians working on the Middle Ages. He has been the recipient of a number of major research funding awards, including the Scouloudi Junior Research Fellowship at the Institute of Historical Research, London, a Broad Fellowship, and many more. He's also a leading specialist on the Crusades, and he has authored several books, rewriting the First Crusade, which came out this year, Curia and Crusade in 2017, with Dr. Susan Eddington, The Deeds of the Franks Who Conquered Jerusalem, in edition and translation published by Oxford University Press. And in 2018, Curia and Crusade received the highly commended award in the British Records Association's Janet Harley Prize. And he has edited 7 other academic books and written more than 40 articles and book chapters, which include the Cambridge History of the Crusades and the New Cambridge History of Britain. He's also appeared on many other podcasts, including Gone Medieval by the History Hit Network and formedievalist.net. And he delivered lectures on medieval history across Britain, Ireland, United States, Australia, Japan, Germany, Austria, France, and Israel. And after lecturing at the universities, he currently holds the position of Keeper of the Scholars and Head of Oxbridge at Rugby School, where he has taught history since 2019. So, without further ado, let us give a huge round of applause to our guest today, Dr. Thomas Smith. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Awesome. I am so excited to dive deep into your books, academia, everything. So, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners that was not covered in the introduction?
Just that I'm writing a new book at the moment called The Egyptian Crusade, Holy War on the Nile, which is coming out with Yale University Press. So that's under contract. And so I'm writing that actively at the moment. I'm really excited about that because it's my first book that I've written for a general audience. And so it's a different type of history I'm writing. I'm really enjoying it. And I'm looking forward to bringing that to a wider audience soon.
Awesome. And speaking of books, do you have any of your books with you to show our viewers and listeners so they can get an idea of what you've written?
Yeah, I do. So this is my most recent book, Rewriting the First Crusade, which has come out with Boydell and Brewer this year. So this is a book about rethinking the First Crusade. It's about thinking about the letters from the First Crusade in a different way. And it's about using manuscripts, and it's got some new manuscript discoveries in. So that's my new one, Rewriting the First Crusade. And then my first book was this one, so Curia and Crusade. It's about the papacy and how it organizes crusading to try and recover the Holy Land. So those are the two that I've done. The other one, the edition, is in press at the moment, so that's not quite out yet, but yeah, hopefully fairly soon.
Awesome. So before we dive into the books you've written, let's turn a little bit to you, Dr. Smith. So let's go back in time a little bit. So I'm curious, growing up, were you always fascinated with history, or did that come about later in life? And same thing for writing too. Did that come later in life, or were you always a scribe growing up?
Really interesting questions that I'm not sure I've got great answers to, but I'll do my best. So I've always loved it. My pupils ask me this. They say, like, why do you love history so much? Why do you love medieval history so much? And I don't really have an answer. I think with any type of love, it's something which is perhaps irrational and it's hard to explain and to kind of explain in rational terms. But I've always loved it since I was a small child. I think when I think back to my childhood, I think about childhood visits with my parents to Bodiam Castle in East Sussex. It's a idyllic 14th century moated castle. It's pretty much what every kid imagines when if they were to draw a castle, that's what they would draw.
Right.
It's outstanding. And I have very fond memories of that. I have fond memories of playing with Lego knights and, watching Robin Hood on TV and things like that. So it was kind of that really, which just developed. And then I was always interested in history and really quite generally. I had much more general interest. And then it was when I was about 17, the book came out, The First Crusade, A New History by Thomas Asbridge. And I read about it first in a magazine for a popular audience. It was BBC History magazine. And I read about that first and I bought the book and I loved the book. And it was also at the time that Kingdom of Heaven, the movie, came out. And,
yes.
Yeah. And it has some detractors, but I'm a big fan of Kingdom of Heaven. I think that's an excellent film. And I went and saw it in the cinema, and those two things together really cemented my interest in the Crusades. And it took that long-standing love I had for the Middle Ages, and it gave it a really concrete focus. So that was how I kind of got into Crusades history, really. So it's a combination of these kind of long-term just enjoyment of medieval history. And I was just always fascinated by the period. There's something about it which just captivates me, and I just find it because it's quite an alien world and in some ways very similar. I just think it's a fascinating way to explore what it means to be human. So I think that's what I find really interesting about that. And in terms of writing, I mean, I did always enjoy writing things as a child, but I don't think I really understood that I had a love for writing until I went to university, and I really enjoyed writing the essays, and it just developed from there, going through the bachelor's and the master's and the PhD. Like, I really enjoyed the process of writing, and it's something that I really love. I think it's a really great mode of expression, and I don't know, I think it's one of those things that it just gives my life meaning, and I really enjoy it, and I enjoy the process, and I enjoy words and playing with words and crafting things. I don't think I'm the world's best writer ever. I don't think I'm an amazing writer, but I do really enjoy it, and it gives me a lot of pleasure, and I hope that comes through for the readers of the stuff that I write.
Awesome. So now let's jump forward ahead in history to where you're graduating from your universities. What would you say was your aha moment when you realized you want to take both your passions for writing and history and create a business out of them? Can you tell us about that period of your life?
Yes, I mean, that's kind of more recent, really. I obviously wrote these two academic books and the articles, and it was very much driven towards writing for an academic audience. But what I always tried to do was, and I think my work is marked by this, is trying to make it accessible, trying to write in a clear style. I don't really. I find some works can be a little bit too obtuse and too difficult to understand. And so what I try to do is I try to make it clear. And I think then basically what happened was I'd written all these things, and I just came to this point where I realized that I wanted to communicate history to a wider audience and speak to a wider audience, and then decided to start, trying to write a trade history book, which is the one I'm writing at the moment, and try and reach out to wider audiences. So that's something that's still ongoing, that I'm still working on. I'm really enjoying it a lot. I think that, when I think back to how I first got into like Crusades history, it was through those popular history books and the BBC History magazine, and so it was very much popular history that got me into it. And I feel like I'd sort of neglected that actually in the pursuit of the academic stuff, and I wanted to adjust that and give something back, I think, to like a wider community of readers who I hope that will enjoy reading hopefully pacey history about Crusades, about medieval history and this past, which is really exciting.
Definitely. And that actually kind of segues perfectly into the next question, which is the creation of your first book, Curia and Crusades. So let's start off with that. What were sort of like the goals you had in mind, not just for yourself as the author, but also for your readers? Because I know you just said that you want it to be very broad and accessible, but I'm also curious, did you also want to dispel any myths that people may have had about the Crusades? Because, you know, as you said earlier, I love Kingdom of Heaven. I absolutely love the film. Yes, there are some historical inaccuracies for some of the characters, both for the Crusaders and the Saracen armies. But of course, it's a great film nonetheless. So can you tell us about, you know, that process when you're like, I'm going to dip my toe in this, I'm actually going to write my first book?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the first one, the Curian Crusade, was a book that derived from my PhD thesis. So I'd written that already
Okay.
as like an academic thesis. That was 100,000 words. And then what I did was I rewrote it into a book, and actually it got a lot longer. I had a new chapter, and actually grew to about, I think it was about 150,000 words by the time it was finished. So it's quite a long book. What it tries to do is it tries to take I was trying to do two things with it, really. So the first one was I was trying to do a study of this pope that had been neglected, so Pope Honorius III, and to look at him in a fresh light. But also what I was trying to do simultaneously was to promote a new, different understanding of how the papacy works when it organizes crusades. So the scholarly consensus up until that point had been that the papacy, how it deals with the Crusades, is very much a proactive policy-making machine, almost like a modern government. So it comes with a manifesto, it tries to implement a set of policies, and then it tries not to waver from those policies. And what my book was saying is that actually the way the papacy works is it's much more responsive to the requests or the petitions of supplicants. So people go to the papacy and they make requests of it, and that's how the papacy develops its sort of political outlook, basically, and is much more flexible and plastic than people had thought. So that was what I was trying to do. So I was trying to make a point which was more specific, which was about how this pope's history develops, but also a broader point about how we approach one of the most important medieval institutions, and how it just works is government, basically. So that was the first book. The next book, Rewriting the First Crusade, that one as well came kind of similar, actually, thinking about it now, is that the letters from the First Crusade hadn't been studied as a whole corpus. So no one had taken the whole, there's 22 letters. It's a great cache of material, really important for the history of letter writing in human history, and hadn't actually been studied in detail for well over 100 years. So that I was taking that new history, but also what I was trying to do was, again, show a different way of thinking about history. So in this case, it was thinking about how letters work, because at the time, 100 years ago, and in the century after, up until this book came out, really, I think most people, not all, but most people had taken the letters pretty much at face value. They'd seen them as these trustworthy documents that are written in the heat of the moment and therefore are very trustworthy. And they don't have the same literary agenda that, say, a chronicle narrative does, that's written by a monk in a monastic scriptorium. And so they're often used then. You would take your monastic chronicles and you would say, well, we'll compare them to the letters. And if the letter says it, then this definitely happened. And so a lot of the history of what actually happens on the First Crusade is based on these documents, but actually they hadn't been interrogated properly for over a century, and no one had applied a new framework of looking at the whole body of letters since that time. So what it went back to the original manuscripts. I was looking in archives. I was very fortunate to find some new manuscripts of some of these letters. And what it showed was, actually, when you compared them critically, it showed you that people were modifying the letters a lot in transmission. So what happens with a medieval letter? Sorry to go off on a slight tangent, but it pulls back into the main
no,
point.
no problem. I'm enjoying this.
Okay, great. So basically what happens is, in the Middle Ages, they write letters, but it's often a communal practice. So it's not just one person writing a private letter to their grandma or something like we do today. Actually, it's much more of a communal process. So you might have someone dictating the letter. That might be a knight on the First Crusade. They might be dictating it to a scribe who's in their employ. So this would be often a religious chaplain who writes documents up for them. So they're dictating the letter, or there might be a group of people dictating the letter, and then it gets written up. So it's already a process of negotiation right from the start of how their content is formed. Then once it's put down on parchment, those are then sent to the recipients. But what happens to them is they're not like most of them aren't like private letters as we would imagine them today, correspondence between two people. Actually, what they are is very much open letters. So they are written with the idea that there's a wide public that's going to receive these. They're kind of like PR exercises, really. It's like a postcard that can be read by everyone that is then shared really broadly, and then monks copy the letters down into their manuscripts, into chronicles, onto blank sheets, whatever they've got, and then they spread then throughout the arteries of the monastic networks of Europe. And what happens during that process is writing is very different from, well, in some ways it's not very different, because these manuscripts it comes from the Latin, so it means like handwritten basically. But as you're handwriting, they're copying the letters, people are adapting them, they're modifying them, adding bits in, cutting things out. They're forming them to fit their own interests and local interests, which are often very different across Europe. And so what happens is you get very different texts emerging, which then proliferate. And it's almost like survival of the fittest of these texts, where some versions will get copied more than others. And what you can do then, to bring this back to the point, is that by comparing those, you get to understand how those texts have developed and changed over time. And you can get closer to the original text, which is really important, because that helps us to know, okay, what actually happened on the Crusade, say. But what it also shows, really importantly, is that these editions are like a mirror to medieval society. And so we can see, why have they changed these bits? Why have they added this part in? What does that tell us about the person that did that, their interest? What was really exciting to audiences in the Latin West in Europe, in the early 12th century? And some of those editions were actually also contained information which had formed some of the history of the First Crusade, and then I could prove to be later editions, or in some cases whole letters or parts of letters have been invented in monasteries. So actually some of the history of the First Crusade has to be rewritten, because some of the things that scholars thought had happened didn't actually happen. These were inventions of sort of imaginations of monks in their cloisters in the 12th century, who were really excited, and they're weaving history into kind of myth and legend. So that was what the second book was doing as well. So I think it was taking a narrow kind of source material and saying, this is what we're going to work with, but actually trying to make a broader point about how we think about the Middle Ages and texts and letter writing culture more broadly.
Fascinating. And this now actually goes into the next question, which I think you may have touched on earlier in your first one, which is, of course, the response. Now, as you said, that both your books were based on your dissertations back in university, and they already had their, feedback, their established audience, which was for the academic community. But I'm curious, Dr. Smith, when you decided to transform your dissertations into novels, adding and or changing some parts of it, did the feedback stay the same, or did you find it to be slightly different?
So yeah, I mean, you kind of get feedback in two different ways, I think, really, with these kind of academic books. So you're getting informal feedback of people you might meet at conferences or seminars, and they would sort of say what they think of the book. And so I think that with both of them, but especially the newer one, Rewriting the First Crusade, it's been really pleasing to have discussions with colleagues and friends and with other people that I hadn't met before. Actually, it's really nice, because obviously publishing opens up these new relationships with people that you haven't met. That's really exciting, and hearing what they thought about the book. And I was really pleased, actually, that I think what I was trying to write came across, and I think that was really pleasing to see that the broad ideas came across as I'd hoped. And what's really exciting as well is then that feedback loop is seeing that it's about a dialogue, isn't it, with people? You don't just want to be saying things and then it should be one way. You want to get something back, and it wants to be a dialogue. So it was really nice to see people interpreting the arguments and the material in their own ways and bringing their own knowledge to it, and actually then me learning something from the audience as well about the research. So that was been really exciting. So it's because this is obviously, Rewriting the First Crusade, this book's been percolating. I've been working on it for 8 years. So, in my head, like I'd, got to this point and the book was finished, but it's really nice then to have those conversations with others about it, and then to glean new insights as well to the material, and to really open that dialogue up. Because when you're writing it, you are sharing it through conferences and through articles and things, but not to the same way as when the book actually is published and becomes a thing. So that's really, really nice. And I hope that it will continue conversations going forward. You also get reviews, of course, like in journals of your books. So that's really, really great to see as well. I haven't had any yet for rewriting The First Crusade, but hopefully get some soon. So
Awesome. So would you say that from the reactions and responses and reviews you've gotten from your two books, that it in a way validated both your standing as an historian, as specialist of the Crusades and the Middle Ages, but also that, you're also now an author. You actually can craft stories that are still academic, still have the knowledge with them, but are also engaging for the general public to where they can understand what you are trying to tell them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that I think there is a distinction there to be made, as you say, between, I think, academics who publish are authors as well, of course.
Yes.
But I think, yeah, this idea of not being an author as an identity as well is perhaps something which leans slightly more towards publishing for a wider audience, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of sort of trying to make a profession out of it. So, yeah, I think that the books I published are academic ones. They are aimed at an academic audience, but I think obviously my new one is very much, which I'm working on at the moment, the Egyptian Crusade. That's very much aimed at a general audience, and you have to write in a different way. You're dealing with it, you're engaging with the history in a different way, because actually what I forgot to mention is that my new book, The Egyptian Crusade, this is a history of the Fifth Crusade, which is the first one to invade Egypt. And it's a story which I've been fascinated by since I was at university, since I was an undergraduate. And the idea I found it just fascinating, really. I started working on it. And actually, that was sort of the subject of my PhD, which became my first book, Curia and Crusade, which was very much about how the papacy organizes the Fifth Crusade, not so much what happens on the crusade. And so it was really interesting to return to this topic, which I knew well from that earlier research, but to return to it in a completely different way and with different questions, different style of writing, different way of approaching the history. And in a way, for me, it's like experiencing that history again for the first time, really, in a different way. And so I really found that really exciting. It's a different way of connecting with the past. And when you're writing a narrative history, you need to sort of fill in the blanks a little bit. You need to create a story out of it. And I think then it helps you to see the history and see the past and understand it in a different way, which is really exciting and really nice to be able to work on. So I'm very lucky to be able to do that.
That's incredible. And I 100% agree. There's nothing more satisfying than working on a book that you are very passionate about and getting to showcase that the material, that how the story is going to end, whether it's like, fiction or academic. How the story is going to end. All the major players. Who are the main characters and who are the side characters. And that kind of leads now into the next question, which is what I like to call a reflective question, which is this. And I'm sure you've probably been told this or may have spoken with other colleagues on this, and that is that being an historian is not an easy job, in the sense, if you're not going into, let's say, government jobs, academia jobs as like professors, lecturers, or working in museums, researcher, archivist, etc. It's not an easy job if you're outside of those. And it's a hustle. And it's even more so when you are trying to be an author at the same time, because there is that sense of imposter syndrome. Even if you've had all of the schooling, all of the research, and you have a story or a topic that you're really fascinated to explore, there is that hesitancy to showcase it because it is a vulnerability. And it is truly a vulnerability, whether it's academic or fiction, because you're showcasing your identity through your work to strangers. And yes, social media is huge for authors and historians and academics. It allows us to showcase our work and to build our reputations and our brands, so to speak. But on the other side, you do allow yourself to be susceptible to trolls, to comments that call out your credentials, and so forth. And all of that just adds to the anxiety. So, Dr. Smith, I'm curious, when you actually made the decision to publish your story through the university, and of course, the university has its own rules, but still, that is a decision that I imagine was a little nervous for you. And I'm wondering, from that point, what disciplined you to continue writing regardless of what the comments would be, the reviews would be, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everyone's got something really valuable to say, and I think all writing has value. And so I think that if people are enjoying being a writer, they should enjoy it and just do it, and not to worry too much about negative feedback. But I know what you mean totally. It's I was watching an interview with George R. R. Martin just 2 days ago, and he was saying about how you might get 100 great reviews and then you get one bad one, and that one sticks in your craw, and you just think like that one all the time. And he says, like, don't engage with those negative reviews, just don't do it. And I think that's got to be one's motto there, I think. And it's a shame that there is negativity online as well, and it's a real shame as well. And I think that when one's dealing with the publishing that I've done so far has been very academic, so actually you're looking at a very small audience, and you're pretty much speaking to a pre-selected audience where everyone knows the rules of engagement, pretty much. Most people not
right.
So I think actually, looking to publish for a popular audience, I think it is different. And you do see say reviews of books on Amazon or something that aren't very charitable. And I think because, as you say, one as a writer, one is making oneself vulnerable, one is opening oneself up. And I think because one pours one heart and soul into it, that then it's very personal, the writing, and it's difficult to detach that, I think, from say a product that you're selling, which is your writing. So I don't think I have an answer, and I think probably just try not to dwell on any negative comments, and to try not to don't read the reviews. Yeah.
No, that's actually very, very true. And a lot of authors have said the same thing, is where not to really look into the negative reviews. Constructive criticism is always very good. And I imagine even more so in the academic publishing community, because, these are some of the books that are going to be going to students and being used as course material. So there's always going to be comments, criticisms to help improve the scholarship going forward. And absolutely all for that. But yeah, going back to the point at hand, there is that sense of vulnerability to showcase your work and to really get your foot in the door, to let people know, hey, this is what I am doing, this is what I specialize in, and to really understand, as one of my fellow historians said, like, I am an historian, like, I know what I'm talking about, like, I'm very passionate about this topic. Like, case in point, like for me, my background is in classical history, and I wrote a fiction book on the Second Greco-Persian War, but as a speculative history of, if the Persians had won the war, how would the Greek world be different? And we see, Greece through the eyes of this Spartan who's now made the bodyguard of the Persian prince. And it's a very interesting what if. It's still fiction, because it's still, its goal is to be entertaining, but I want to showcase the academic side, where it's not too academic, where people are going to get lost, but it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and so forth. And speaking of books and sort of building the audience, that now leads into the business side of the interview, the business side of being an author. So, Dr. Smith, I was wondering if you could tell us about, your experiences with the academic publishing, and if it's sort of different from, traditional publishing. Yes, traditional publishing and the bigger publishing houses, they have a product to sell to the masses, but I'm wondering if it's a little bit more, not strict, but more challenging to publish a reference book in an academia press as opposed to self-publishing on your own.
Yeah, so I think both all different types of publishing obviously have different advantages and drawbacks. I think what you get with academic publishing is obviously the peer review process is really important in terms of giving it a seal of quality that you need for, as you say, like an academic reference book. So that's really important that you have that. So that adds a lot of value to it as well and gives it that sort of seal of quality. But what you're thinking about then is obviously the books are marketed to a very small audience. They're probably most of them going to be bought by university research libraries, and so they have small print runs. They're very expensive, mostly, not always, and you're reaching a smaller audience, so that is different. So in terms of if your topic has academic appeal and value, then you'll probably find there's a range of publishers who some will only take on things that are very popular, some that would take on only the very best scholarship and so on, and some in between. So you'll probably find a publisher that fits for most topics, but some topics might be too niche, for instance. Whereas working with a big trade publisher, it's got to be something that sells. And so you've got to have a book that actually, it can't be too niche. It has to be something that appeals to a wide audience that they can market. And there you're really fixed a little bit by what audiences are already interested in. And so when you look at, say, history, you see so much on World War II and the 20th century, because that's where a lot of people's interest lies. Comparatively less, sadly, on the Middle Ages. But where in the Middle Ages, what you see is clustering around particular things. The Vikings are very popular. The Normans are very popular. The Crusades are very popular. And then you've got the big Tudor history that's massive in England. So you've got those particular topics that tend to attract. So you probably want to be writing something that somehow connects to things that people already know about in some way. And ideally, you want to do it in a way that's fresh and new, because you don't want to write the same book that people have read 100 times before. But there probably has to be some sort of connecting strand. So people say, oh, yeah, I know about the Crusades, but I've never read about the one that invaded Egypt. And I really like ancient Egypt, and I like Crusades, and this is the first book that does that. So for a popular audience, so I'm going to read that book. So that's what you're thinking about. So there are different concerns. It's got to be marketable. And then it also boils down to style as well, and how you, as you say, like how you've written the characters, because I think people really are attracted to character-led history, and in academic work you don't have to do that. It can be very like institutional history or history of documentation, but actually it's about those characters. And there's a big crossover there, I think, with fiction, not in the sense that what one is writing is fictitious, but in the sense that one needs to be able to draw out the characters and the stories and build a narrative, just as one would for a fiction book, as you say.
Absolutely, 100%. And also, just to add to that, I have like a whole library of books. Some of them are a mix of medieval history, some of them are a mix of Roman history, others of late antiquities. And there's a wide range. Like when I remember reading those during my graduate studies, I was blown away by the vast number of different topics, specifically within the Roman Empire, from the fate of Rome, which examines like disease, silk slaves in Sturbas, which focus on Rome's connection to the Silk Road, barbarian migrations, the Germans, and everything. It's just very, very fascinating. And yes, to your point, that there are some academic books that are written as academia, in the sense that this is something that was like a paper and it very much reads like a dissertation. But then you also have other academic books that are written to have a more fictitious prose, in the sense that it reads like a book. You can understand it, but it's still, has scholastic means and everything. And that kind of leads into the next set of questions. So I think we may have touched on this a little bit, but I want to go more in depth into it, which is, of course, the audience and understanding the audience. So, Dr. Smith, as you've said before, you wanted your books to appeal to a wide range of people who could understand the information that you're presenting to them and not get lost in the academic jargon. So I'm wondering, how challenging was that for you as an author and an historian to balance that out? And also, when did you consider the audience for your books? I mean, in a sense, is that for authors, we are the target audience first and foremost. We know the story better than anyone else. But publishing it, we really have to consider, okay, Who is this book geared towards? What is the genre, the category, the age group, etc.?
Yeah, I think audience is key. I'm thinking about the audience all the time when I write the book. So when I'm writing this new book, The Egyptian Crusade, like I'm just, every sentence I write, I'm thinking about the audience. Like, have they got enough information to understand what's going on here? Have I set the context enough? What I'm really trying to do is make this history accessible. I'm trying to make it exciting, and I'm trying to bring something a bit fresh to it. I'm trying to give them a really good sense of place and location, and this idea that to really put themselves in the footsteps of the Crusaders in Egypt and this world that the Crusaders are discovering for the first time, which is really exciting for them. They've never been, or most of them have never been, to Egypt before in the Nile Delta. They're sort of coming across some ancient Egyptian ruins and this whole new environment, basically. And I'm trying to think about where's the wonder there and the fascination. How can I convey that to the reader in a way that makes them feel like they're there, that transports them back in time 800 years and to the Holy Land, and then to Egypt and to Europe as well, and to make it feel like they're there and they're watching. So I'm thinking about audience all of the time. I'm thinking about I'll always get feedback from people who I think hopefully represent some of my audience. So my partner's read some of my work. So she's a vet. She's not a specialist in medieval history. And so she very kindly reads some, and so gives me some feedback. And then, so I think, can I communicate this to a non-specialist audience? So that's really helpful. My dad's a big reader of medieval history. So shout out Jonathan. And he reads my stuff too. And I got some close friends who are authors as well, like Steve Tibble and Jamie Doherty, and they read some of my stuff as well, and give me feedback on that. So it's really helpful. So I'm getting a range of views from people who I hope represent different sort of constituencies of my audience, to get a sense of have I done enough as an author to do my job and to create a fun book that people actually want to read and can understand, and it takes them somewhere else that they haven't been before.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads into the next question. I'm actually skipping the follow-up question, but I'm jumping to this one because I think it is really important, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts on it. And it actually comes from, I guess I had on the show earlier this year, Eric Bowden, and I asked him about, what were his favorite books growing up and authors who have helped him craft his authorial voice. And he pretty much plainly said, I can list them all, which I am going to do, but at the end of the day, it's my words that the readers are going to listen to. I'm not trying to be so-and-so. I'm not trying to be such and such. I'm trying to be me, because at the end of the day, it's my words. Because I want the reader to understand, when they pick up my book, they have an understanding of how I write stories, how I present characters, and so forth. And I think that's very true for academic publishing. Yes, in academic publishing, you have to get a wide range of different sources, primary, secondary, either interviews, media, so forth, etc. But at the end of the day, you are crafting your own voice through the information that you have gathered. You're not trying to be Wolfram. You're not trying to be Harper, Dan Jones, etc. You are presenting your own voice. So for you, Dr. Smith, how have you been able to balance this scale, so to speak? And has it been a challenge with every book going forward?
That's a great question. I think everyone has their influences, and I think that some of them one is conscious of, and some of them one is not conscious of. I think that, as you say, there are some writers out there who are doing amazing work in medieval history, and I think there's some from the kind of academic side who are writing for popular audiences. I would think about Jonathan Phillips, who was my PhD supervisor. He's excellent at crafting a story which is backed up by real academic rigor for a popular audience. He writes really nicely. So, I found his work excellent. There's also a lot of great scholars who are working in this trade history sort of crossover with academia, like Steve Tibble as well, and he writes these great books that are very much grounded in the history and very evocative of the period, but really accessible and fun to read and written with real verve. So trying to look at those and see what they do well. I mean, there's obviously, you know, some of the authors you mentioned there, like Dan Jones, Helen Carr, Helen Caster, that are writing really excellent history for a general audience and doing it in a really engaging way and really engaging prose. And I think that's the key, that the writing is not sort of journeyman prose. It's very gripping and really accessible. And I think it makes people enjoy history that maybe wouldn't enjoy, say, like a traditional academic sort of dry book. So those are, you know, some of the authors among many that, you know, I really enjoy reading and I think influence me. But I think that every author has their own distinct voice, and although, you know, one enjoys reading those books, and I think probably some of it does go in through osmosis, I think that actually each author has their own distinct voice. And so I think that yeah, I hope that my voice as an author is distinct. But those are some of the influences, and those are some of the ones I try and I look at what they're doing and think these guys are writing amazing books for a popular audience, and just, you know, try and just see how they're doing it really. And it's often through really great storytelling, through some great anecdotes, picking out good examples from the sources, and, you know, just a nice prose style, and, you know, just trying to write as well as I can. You know, having read some of those great books, but I think that everyone is distinct, and I think that my voice as an author is distinct, but it's you know, obviously it's hard to tell the kind of subconscious influences of other books as well, and it's the sum total of reading over one's life as well that it also plays a role. So, and the kind of also conversations with, you know, people like my colleagues at work, and the kind of vocabulary that they use, and one hears more often in conversation, one's more likely to use those words in one's writing. So I think one's also a product of one's environment, not just in the terms of which books one reads, but also the kind of scholarly discussions or authorial discussions that one is having with colleagues and friends outside of just strictly reading.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads now to the next question, which is, of course, readership. And I think readership is very important. And for what I mean by this, viewers and listeners, if you're just watching this for the very first time, for authors, yes, we want to target the audience, regardless of what genre we are writing for. But within the audience, there is the readership. And it's that readership that's going to pick up our books. And that is also a struggle and a challenge, because that dictates how we write, how we present information, how we write characters, and so forth. That's the same thing in academic publishing. If you're writing a book for, let's say, a primary school or secondary school, the language is going to be vastly different if you're writing for university. So for you, Dr. Smith, where would you say your books fall under the readership? New adult or adult?
Yeah, so I think the academic ones would definitely fall under the adult readership category. So they're really academic, sort of quite technical books, which I think would be best read by someone at a university level and above. So you're looking at from bachelor students through to masters, PhDs, but also independent researchers and scholars. Anyone that wants to, and I don't mean there to exclude people. I'm not suggesting that the only people that could read them would be people at universities. But that would be the sort of level of technicality, I think. So there's that. But with the new book I'm writing, The Egyptian Crusade, that one would be aimed at, I mean, I hope it would be a book that will be kind of stretchy for young adults to read, but I think the prime readership will be adult. But I hope that actually, yeah, if you're like I was when I was you know, in my late teens and discovering some of these popular history books about the Crusades, I hope that people might be able to read them and enjoy them too at a slightly younger level.
Absolutely. And before we get into the next reflective question, I also think it's now also talk about, of course, you know, marketing and branding as authors as well. And I want to now take a turn to now focus on your other interviews that you've been on, Dr. Smith, from the medievalists .net, as well as medieval on History Hit Network. So can you tell us about that and how that all came about?
Yeah, I'm struggling to think exactly how those came about now. I think it was sort of accumulation of relationships and getting in touch. I think I reached out to them, but I probably had some previous contact with them in other ways. So yeah, about getting on the podcast and doing those. And so yeah, but it's something that I think one has to build up, as you say, in terms of building, as you say, a brand. And I think it helps. It's about connections as well, and relationships with people, and building those up and getting to know people. And yeah, I guess it's the kind of natural accumulation of those things, which is all the fun part about being a writer, right? So that you get to meet great people and have great conversations, and so that's the fun part.
Absolutely. And I've been a subscriber to History Hit Network. They have some incredible content. I've known some great colleagues of mine in the UK specifically who have worked with History Hits Network and their teams. So they create amazing content. And again, it's also what we're talking about, where they are presenting history that's still academic, but they've woven it in a way, especially for media, where people, the consumers, can understand the material and it's familiar to them. Because I think that's also very important when you're writing a book. You want the information to be familiar, even if they've never picked up a book on that topic, but they maybe have seen a movie or seen something on TV and they're really passionate about it. That might draw their interest. And that is, of course, struggle and a grind and a hustle in of itself. And that kind of leads into now the big question. So brace yourself for this, Dr. Smith. This is a pretty big one. So I've been doing this show now. It'll be now 3 years later this month. But in total, I've been doing podcasting now for 5 years. And I've talked with a wide range of authors, historians, history enthusiasts, reenactors, and so forth. And I've learned so much from them, and I've accumulated a lot of knowledge from these interviews and discussions. And what I've come to realize, for authors and historians, there's two paths: to be an author / historian, and to be known as an author / historian. One is dedicated to storytelling and honing their craft, as well as guiding the scholarship through more discussion to help reach new audiences. The other is focused on marketing, showcasing their work at either lectures, panels, summit meetings, etc. And each road has its own hurdles and obstacles, just as life does. But I definitely feel, maybe you may agree with this, Dr. Smith, that especially for first-time authors and even those who are just out of university and want to take their dissertation and turn it into a book, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme overnight. It is long hours. It's a grind. It's fine-tuning the material to where it is, quote-unquote, book worthy, and I hate using that. But what I mean is, in the publishing industry, whether it's traditional or academic, there is no guarantee that first book is going to give you everything you want. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it is true. And of course, just like in traditional publishing, in academic publishing, there are those first books that just skyrocket their authors to success, and all the power to them. That's not an easy thing to do. But generally speaking, you have these highs and lows in the publishing world, and especially when it comes to clicks in media or television that are basing off of like a recent discovery or findings, etc. And everyone wants to grab a piece of that. That's very true in the academic publishing world, that everyone wants to write a book that's about that one thing to get all the rewards. And unfortunately, it's not sustainable, and it could kill one's passion to write as well as pursue history. So Dr. Smith, I turn to you to hear your thoughts on this discussion, and what have you learned from it on your own journey as an author?
Yeah, I think that is a big question, I think. Yeah, I think you're definitely right. I think that I think a lot of it's about luck, isn't it? Lucky breaks and being fortunate, and you've got to keep taking the chances to put yourself in the position where you could have that lucky break, and learning
Right.
from maybe the ones where it doesn't go quite so well. I think, as you say, though, there are some things where there'll be a hot topic will come up, there'll be some discovery, and if you're writing about that or you've written about that, then that's a great thing that'll maybe skyrocket you to success. That's great. That's a lucky break, but it's hard to predict that. But yeah, I think ultimately at the end of the day, you've got to be doing what you love, haven't you? And I think that if you love something and you think there's value in it, then there is, and that maybe you have a big audience for that, maybe you have a
Mhm.
small audience for that. But at the end of the day, I think as long as you're enjoying what you're doing in terms of the writing, and I think that's the most important thing. But as you say, in terms of trying to be strategic and trying to build up a profile, I think that it's definitely about long-term consistency and hard work. But also, as you say, getting a lucky break does help. And I think the more times one can put oneself in that position where you might get a lucky break, the more likely you are to get one, I think. But it does happen at different stages for different people. And also, I think sometimes it's maybe there isn't a situation where one gets a lucky break and it's a complete game changer in terms of one's
Right.
career, but actually it's this accumulation of just working hard, writing good stuff, and just sticking at it and just doing it. I think over time that accumulation of writing helps to build a profile. So even if one doesn't get kind of a lucky break that completely changes everything and one's career skyrockets, I think there's still multiple ways to go about it. But ultimately, I think it's got to be about the passion and the enjoyment and just enjoying writing and reading. And I think that's worth it for its own sake, really.
Absolutely. And also within, building one's profile, that also comes from marketing as well, meeting new colleagues, reaching out. And I know you've touched on this a little bit with some of the other authors and colleagues that you've met or have read works of. But now, Dr. Smith, I turn over to you to ask, are there any people in your life who have helped you on your journey, be it professors in academia or fellow colleagues or family friends who have
Yeah.
been by your side, that you would like to give a personal shout out to?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, there's so many people. I think I would feel ashamed if I missed anyone out. So I think I'll keep it general if I may. But I think,
Okay.
I've always tried to give in my acknowledgements to my publications, kind of detailed acknowledgements for all the people. But definitely my family, of course, have always supported me and been there. And it's really hard to do something like this and to squirrel oneself away and kind of write for long periods of time without the support of those around you. So that's really important. Really grateful to that. My friends as well who've always supported me and shown interest, and great colleagues as well, the places I've worked who've shown interest in what I'm writing about, and kind of boost you up. And then there's the broader community of scholars and writers that I know that it's a really nice thing to be a part of. And I think there is a solitary element to writing, but also I think it's that broader community doing things like this, like talking to you and having this great conversation. This is really fun, and it's really nice to be able to do those kind of things. And I think there's definitely, it's not just a lone wolf type thing. And so yeah, I got a lot of debts to people, and I'm very grateful to friends, family, colleagues, other scholars, and readers. And, anyone who's bought a copy of the book. So thank you the most for actually paying your own money for this stuff. I mean that's the greatest thing. So yeah, lots of debts I think, but equally I think the debts will also make it such a valuable thing to do.
Absolutely. As a final question to this amazing interview, Dr. Smith, what is your word of wisdom to fellow historians still in academia, not sure of what to do with their lives once they've completed the degree, as well as to authors who want to get their foot in the door in academic publishing?
Yeah, I'd say that there are more than, I'm quoting a friend of mine who said there's more than one way to be a historian, and there's more than one way to be an author, more generally as well. And I think that having a set career path where you try and achieve a particular goal, um, you know, might not always work out, but there's always other opportunities there. And actually there's lots of ways to be a historian or to be an author and to write things and enjoy the written word and being a scribe basically. And so I think that just stick at it and just keep enjoying it. And if you're enjoying it, and just keep going. And I think that's the thing, is just keep going and just keep enjoying it. I think, yeah, that'd be my advice. It's not very profound, I'm afraid, but I think that's what I think.
But I think that it is very true, especially when you say that there's more than one ways to be an historian and more than one ways to be an author. And that is very, very true. And that actually speaks, very true to me personally. When I was still in academia, I wanted to work for the Smithsonian. I wanted to be an archivist researcher. But as I realized I didn't have the skill set, and that kind of, deflated my aspirations. But I realized, I did have another passion, which was writing. And I love writing history. And I've now, since I graduated in 2021, within 3 years, I've been featured in several independent magazines in the UK, also here in the United States. And I also have one officially coming out in physical form next year, which I am very excited to share with everyone when that comes out. And I think on that note, we're going to end this incredible author and historians interview here on the channel. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another amazing episode. I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Thomas Smith for coming on the show, telling us all about his books, as well as his current book on the Egyptian Crusade, which I'm very eager to add to my collection. Dr. Smith, thank you again so much. And where can people find you on social media to stay up to date with your books? And where can people go and purchase copies of your 2 books, Curia and Crusades, and re-examining the First Crusade?
Well, thank you so much for having me first. It's been a real pleasure, and you're doing great work. So all these things are just brilliant. So well done, and thank you for having me. Where can people find me? So I've got probably the best portal is my website, which is thomaswsmith.co.uk, all one word. I'm on Instagram, medieval_Tom. I'm on Facebook as well under my name. I've got a link tree, which is TW Smith. So those are probably the best places to start, and that's got links to everything.
Awesome. I will link all that down below in the description of this video. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another amazing interview here on the channel. And be on the lookout for the last 2 episodes of December coming out this week. December's Historians Lounge episode, as well as the final author interview for the month of December. And be on the lookout for my newsletter of next year, because I'm already going through the socials looking for new people. So I'm going to do this as a first time. If you're an author and historian or history enthusiast, history blogger, anyone on social media, and you want to be featured on an episode for next year, comment down below in the description of this video with your socials for me to reach out to you, and we'll see if we can set up a session for an interview for next year. Again, thank you, everyone, for joining us for another amazing interview here on the channel. A huge thank you to Dr. Smith for coming on the show. We wish him the very best going forward into the new year, and we cannot wait to see what he has in store for us. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all to have a wonderful day, and asking you to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And until next time, I'll see you then.